Carter died owing me something. Carter died owing me something, and I owe him something. So we're in kind of mutual debt. About 3 months ago, I saw Carter at Shenandoah. I went to have lunch with my cousin, and Carter was in the lunch counter there. And I bought his lunch. We chatted, and he said, "Come over and visit me sometime." And I said, "Oh, absolutely, I promise I will." And I didn't keep my promise because he didn't stay around long enough. And also, he owed me because at Pat's funeral in June of 2011, which I'm sure some of you attended, he did great eulogies. Jim O'Brien's, and then, of course, Pat's. And I said, "Carter, you got to do my funeral." He said, "Oh, absolutely." He said, "But I won't wear a tie." I said, "Well, I won't wear a tie if I have to do a memorial for you." So we got even on that count. But anyhow, he owes me a eulogy, and I owe him lunch. The time of Carter Merbreyer at Channel 6 was historic, and the one person who really knows all the details of when he came, how he arrived, if they paid him or didn't pay him, was Lou Klein, who unfortunately isn't with us today because he's recovering from a bout of pneumonia. But he's doing well, and next time, Lou will be here. We have a group of people who knew Carter very well at different levels, and Dave Roberts is the first one who shared an office with Carter when he came to the station in 1978. Carter, of course, had been there, and on the second floor, they had all the non-news TV people huddled in one room. Dave Roberts.
These are microphones, right? Thank you, Mr. Mark. Nice to be working with you again. It's been a long time. I'm just delighted to be here today. Thanks to Jerry and the organization for inviting me, and to see so many wonderful faces and recall so many wonderful times. As far as Carter is concerned, let me say right at the top, I know we're here talking about Carter and Captain Noah and so forth, but the Duracell battery for Carter was Pat. She was the energy force that really kept him leveled and kept him going. I used to always love to hear her singing in the office. And it was a calming effect, not only on Carter, but also on the rest of us who were running around doing various things in various shows. And then there was always the stable Larry Ferrari. What an amazing person he was. Laro Ferrero. Always there, always calm. At a certain time each day, they went out to lunch when they left. It was wonderful to see them. Mark said I shared an office with him. It's kind of interesting. When I arrived in 1978, on the second floor there was a room maybe half the size of this, and they pointed at me and said, "Kid, you go over there." There was a corner. So I sat in the corner. It was his old desk that I'm sure was in storage someplace. And I opened a drawer, and there was an old memo in there from Triangle Broadcasting talking about rules of behavior for anyone that worked for them. And there were things like dressing appropriately and watching your language and make sure you do this and public appearance and so forth. And I was reading all these things down, listening to them, reading all the things on this list, and at the same time I would hear Carter over in the other area saying, "That son of a bitch, he never did this." And I was saying to myself, apparently he never got this memo. But he was irascible, he was bawdy, he was a number of wonderful things all combined into one. I can recall vividly having him walk over to me one day after I was there a couple of weeks. He walked over and he said, "Hey kid, do you want to go to lunch?" And that, to be invited to go to lunch with that group, with Pat and Larry Ferrari and Art Moore, that was something, dude. It was like being accepted into the group. So I was very pleased with that. He only asked me once to go to lunch, though, so. Carter Murbrier, Captain Noah. Captain Noah, Carter Murbrier. About 3 weeks before Carter passed. Yes? Carter calling. I'm sorry, Carter. I had the opportunity to go and visit Carter. He had an amazing apartment complex. It was like 2 or 3 bedrooms, but when you walked into his apartment, it was like walking into the set on his show. It was beautifully decorated, pictures of different guests that they had. You felt as if you were walking right back into the Ark. It was truly, truly amazing. He was on a walker then, and so he was in one area, so we walked over to the living room, we sat down opposite one another, and we started to talk. And I didn't know where to go with the conversation. I didn't know what subject to bring up. He obviously knew he was in difficult straits. You could see he was failing physically. Mentally, he was still very, very sharp, surprisingly so to me. But what do you say to someone like that? You certainly don't say, "How's it going?" Because we all knew how it was going, sadly. So he said to me, "I don't know who I am." And I said, "Carter, I don't understand that. What do you mean?" "Well," he said, "I'm Carter Murbrier. I'm Captain Noah. Which one am I? Who am I?" And he started this whole discussion about apparently the dichotomy that was there. He was trying to decide who he really was. And we discussed it for a little while. I said, "Well, Carter, as far as I'm concerned, you're both people. But what I determined, and this is just my own personal evaluation, and Carter Murbrier, when he became Captain Noah, became someone else. And that was the persona that he publicly presented. Anyone who's in front of the camera has a certain persona that you have to put forward. And that's exactly what he did for years. So Captain Noah was one person, but inside Captain Noah, as strange as it may sound, was Carter Murbrier, who wanted to do, I'm sure, many different things publicly that Captain Noah couldn't do. As a result, when you met with him in person, if you had a drink with him, or if you went to dinner, or if you worked with him, you saw the Carter Murbrier side of him, which was, I think, dramatically different than the other. And I found it personally troubling that here was a man at this stage of his life who was still asking himself that question. So we talked for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then as we sat there, he gradually dozed off on me. Not that that hasn't happened to me before in performing, but and I knew I had to leave. So I kind of got up and just nudged him on the knee, and he looked up like this, and I said, I'm going to go now, Carter. It was wonderful to see you. He said, will you promise to come back and see me, and we'll talk some more? And I said, "Carter, I would be delighted to come back and see you and talk some more." And I left. And that was our last conversation and the last time that I saw him. But he left an indelible mark on so many people in this community. The Captain Noah, of course, mark is always there. The Carter Merbrier mark, those of us who were fortunate enough to know him on a different basis, is also with us. But today we celebrate, whether it's Carter or whether it's the good old Captain Noah, we celebrate both of them. And you're going to hear some amazing stories from other people that knew him much better than I did and worked with him for many, many years. I'm just so pleased and happy to be here and to say a few words on his behalf. And remember, fondly and with love, Captain Noah, Mrs. Noah, Larry and the whole gang, and of course, Carter Merbrier. Thank you.
I remember when Larry Ferreri died, I think the captain was in charge of his funeral, and he picked a burial spot across the street in the big cemetery in Ballackinwood, so that he could see the station from where he was buried. And Carter picked a spot. He said, I want him to be able to watch us. I think we have Uncle Art on the phone, do we?
You do,
We
you do.
Uncle Art, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Sorry I can't be there.
Yeah, I should explain quickly that the reason we called you Uncle Art is that we all used to see you at Dave Roberts' house, and the Roberts kids always called you Uncle Art. So
They do, still do.
They still do, right?
Now I think it's a great uncle. I think I'm past the age of that.
Well, you can be an uncle for a long time, you know.
That's true. That's true.
That is true.
Great uncle, I think.
Yes. So we're sharing Captain Noah's stories, and I'll bet you have a few good ones.
Well, it's an interesting scenario with me, and this is something I've always found fascinating about this business in general, about how circumstances take you places that you don't expect. My first association with Captain Noah was actually when I was in graduate school at Temple in a course that Lou Klein taught on production. And at the time, we used WPVI then as the studio for class and production work. And many times when we'd come, Captain Noah would be, and this was sort of in the beginning of his television career, he was taping shows. And we'd be in the control and we'd be watching what was going on, and I did meet him briefly as we were exiting one day. And it was all great, and I never gave too much thought about it. Roll the clock ahead, 6, 7 years, when I came to PVI from Buffalo. And in the beginning when I came, one of my jobs there was to direct Carter with Captain Noah and his magical ark. So 6 years later, I end up directing a show that I had watched as a student and never thought I would be a part of that. And certainly never thought I'd be part of a show that certainly established itself in the history of longevity, not only in Philadelphia, but around the country, as one of the oldest children's programs that stayed on the air. And I think the fascinating thing about that even was in the beginning, when it was Monday through Friday, which is when I was doing it, that first hour of GMA was preempted to run Captain Noah because the ratings were so high, and the revenue and dollars that it made for the station made so much sense that they preempted the network. So it was many years later, obviously, where GMA then took over and Carter went to the weekends. But I did have that period of time when it was Monday through Friday. And I think the thing that always fascinated me with Carter was his intensity to make sure that, and I'm sure Elaine's going to talk about this too if she hasn't, that he covered everything possible for a very diverse audience. And as the show became more and more popular, people sought him out, obviously, to be on that program. So Philadelphia audiences and young people growing up got to see the biggest names in any field, and whether it was sports, the Olympics, performers, going all the way back to Elvis Presley. There was an opportunity shared by young people in a way that really was unique around the country. And he fostered that, and he did such a marvelous job at being able to continue that. And as I said, to witness it and see his devotion to that form and to make sure that his audience was served was very inspiring when you had to do this day in and day out, with obviously a limited budget. This was not a network show. And yet the public was served in a way that, as I said earlier, with a lot of children's shows, they weren't getting that kind of service from cartoons and some of these shows that pretended to be educational. This was educational, but it was information, but it was also entertainment. And he knew the line between those areas. And he was very clear that he wanted to make sure his viewers, as I say, got the most from these people, that he had the opportunity to bring them through the arc.
Some of the names I saw on the list of guests on that show were Elvis Presley and Frank Perdue, the Chicken Man, and even
Yes.
Jon Stewart in his early days, I guess, was once a guest on Carter's show. Were you there when it was syndicated to 22 different markets?
No, that
think
was before I got there.
I think in 1970 it was syndicated, and it had a bigger audience than Captain Kangaroo and Sesame Street combined.
Yes.
It really was big. It really was big. And he was, as Dave pointed out, he became Captain Noah, didn't he?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, when I heard Dave's remarks, and I was thinking, oftentimes when we would be at dinner, or after I came to New York, and I would come down and visit Carter and Pat at their home for a weekend, and we'd go out to dinner, and both of them loved their cocktails. And sometimes sitting there, I kept confusing the two people, because I'm envisioning Captain Noah, and then I'm seeing Carter Murbrier in a social environment. And it was an interesting dichotomy, as Dave mentioned, to see both personalities.
He was quite a character.
He was. One of the things we used to do, and it goes back a little bit to what you were saying about the burial for Larry and where he was buried, we used to go to lunch almost every day. And it was like a ritual. We had to leave at noon. Carter liked to drive. He hated if Larry drove because he didn't like Larry's driving. And we would go to Baffa's, which was up on the hill past that cemetery. And it always seemed strange after the fact, after Larry passed away, that when we would go by there, you felt that void, because we were all so used to being together for so long. And I would go to lunch with them long after I stopped doing the show, when I was then doing AM Philadelphia and then doing the advertising and promotion for the station. We would still do lunch. And as I say, there was a regiment. You had to be out of there by 12. You had to get going. He didn't like waiting around. It was almost like a school teacher or a minister. But it was great fun, because every meal turned into a story. And he would always top himself. I mean, it was lunch with a floor show. Most people there probably know this, but maybe they don't. There were two things that I was always so impressed with Carter, and what he would do for the community in terms of being at tragic situations. If there was someone in the fire department or the police department who had a loss or a tragedy, he would be involved with that, and not seeking out publicity. Many times people didn't even know he went. I know many times on his personal appearances, especially in neighborhoods that needed some help, he would anonymously donate part of his fee to a local church. Again, nobody really knew about that. I mean, he was so committed to doing good things, and it just showed both on camera and off. And it was always very impressive to be around that and to see these faces of young people. And then as they grew older, as they became parents and their kids started watching the show, the respect and admiration his viewers had for him, you could just see that love. And you don't get that very often because it was an honesty, and there was an honesty on both sides of the camera. And people felt that, and I think he did an enormous amount to educate in a very broad sense, in a very diverse audience, people that, again, would not have had the opportunity to see and hear and be witness to so many things in history that he brought through the program.
I always had the feeling that he spent a couple of decades as a Lutheran minister first, and of course he was the chaplain of the Philadelphia Police Department as well, and then he
Yes.
developed the Noah show, and I always thought that in some way the Noah program became his pulpit, and he continued his ministry on TV.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was one, uniquely one of a kind. I mean, as I was moving to New York, and after I'd been here for a number of years, he would call me every once in a while, and when I didn't see him, and usually it had to do with friends of his, he wanted to get tickets to come and see live, and he used to get so frustrated. He was like, well, I really shouldn't be bothering with this. And I said, it's not an issue. This is not a problem. And he had, and this included some of the healthcare people that worked with him once they moved. And, for me, it was like, this is the least I can do for someone who not only was an influence on where my career continued to go, but as I say, the mere fact that in graduate school, here was somebody that I was watching, learning the techniques of what went into that show, that years later I would end up directing. I mean, it was always very personal to me beyond just the job.
Well, the set for Captain Noah's The Ark is still in the Please Touch Museum in Fairmount
Yes.
Park. Maybe the next time you're in town, we'll all get together and go there and have a drink on Carter.
I would love it.
That's a good idea. And before you go, everything okay in New York? How's your morning show doing? Are you
Morning show is doing well. We're still searching for co-hosts. We're in the process now of doing my yearly torture, the Halloween special.
Very good.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Very good.
Embarrassment to be seen. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Art, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks. I appreciate the invitation, and my best to everybody there. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you, Art. Art Moore. One of the good guys. Ed Cunningham produced a show on WHYY that I'm...
Before we do that,
Yes.
this guy said, do not put it in the newsletter. But he didn't say I couldn't tell you. I talked to Vince Leonard yesterday. He lives about 3 miles from where the debate is tonight. And we had a lively conversation, which I won't repeat because it was a private conversation.
Let me guess.
But he sounded great, lively. He's going to be 92 the beginning of next year. He sounds really, really fabulous. And I just thought you would like to know he's doing really well. I talked to Mark Krim about 3 weeks ago. He was in the North Carolina mountains writing his autobiography. So that's a report. I just happened to be thinking of it while I was sitting there. So
This is your platform. You're welcome anytime. You own the microphone, as President Reagan once said. Ed Cunningham produced a show on WHYY. Now, Ed, you have to come up and explain this to me. It was called Philly's Favorite TV Kids Show Hosts. Now, was this just a special? Explain it. Tell us about Carter.
All right, thank you, Mark. Yes, thank you. You may applaud me. Thank you. Yeah, I guess I would have to say it is true that I knew Carter less than many of the people in this room, especially the folks who are speaking today. I got a call yesterday from Jerry, who informed me, of course, that Lou Klein was ill and could not offer his reminiscences, which would be very authoritative, of course. But since I have never been able to say no to Jerry in all the years I've known him, for about a half a century, of course I said yes, and also very honored to say a few words about the great Carter Merbrier. Yes, that's right. I did a show, this is 10 years ago, I guess, just about, Jerry, and with the rather unwieldy title of Philly's Favorite Kid Show Hosts. And that's exactly what it was. For much of my career, I entertained the thought, wouldn't it be great to take all the kids who are now grown up in the Delaware Valley back to that time when we were all little, and these wonderful hosts whom we saw on local television really guided us along the way. Now, I go back far enough that I remember names like Willie the Worm and Mr. Rivets and Bertie the Bunyip, and of course the great Sally Starr, and folks from that era. Now, Carter Merbrier, along, let us say, with Pixand, for instance, and a few of the others, came along when I was a little older, when I was getting into college. So I didn't really know their programs firsthand the way I did some of the earlier ones. But you can't do a program on the great television kid shows without including, of course, Carter Merbrier / Captain Noah. So that was something I had to do, and I'm very happy to tell you it was one of the most successful programs we've ever had on WHYY, because just as I suspected, people really liked the idea of being able to go back to their childhood and revisit some of their very first television friends. And so we had the opportunity to visit Carter at his home in Gladwin. And now, for those of you who have been to Carter's home, how many can say that they visited him out in Gladwin? Mark, and several of you have done that. Beautiful, first of all, overlooking the Schuylkill River. And there's a wonderful garden around there. But the one thing I noticed, and Carter, I hope you don't mind if I mention this, Art actually stole my thunder on this a little bit. We had to be very careful the way we shot the interview and the feature on Carter in his home. Thank you, Jerry. Because, well, let's put it this way. The man enjoyed a nip. Let's put it that way.
Johnny Walker Black.
Yeah, Johnny Walker Black. And the amazing thing about it is it was like his bottles were like knickknacks throughout the house. It's not like he had a discreet little liquor cabinet. No, they were displayed in the bookcases and on the mantels and right beside the sofa. Everywhere you turned, there was top shelf stuff. So we had to be very careful the way we shot that. If we got any setup shots of Carter walking through the house, I don't know if it would have been appropriate to include Johnny Walker Black label in that shot. But he commanded the room. I think that was the impression I had of Carter Merbrier. He absolutely commanded the room. And the other impression I had, too, was that when Pat was still with us at that time, but she was failing. And you could see how protective Carter was with her. He had her in the shot with the interview, and she was able to say a few words to us. But how fiercely protective he was of his wife, Mrs. Noah. And I was telling my wife about this yesterday, and she knew Pat Merbrier through her experience, through her membership in American Women in radio and television. And she said to me that she could tell from talking to Pat of the absolute determination and commitment that she had, and Carter as well, toward the welfare of the kids that they were entertaining on that program. It was obvious in every conversation she had with Pat. So I'm just here to say that, as I said earlier, you can't do a program on kid show hosts without including Carter Merbrier, Captain Noah. And it was something that I will absolutely never forget. And I'm a poor substitute, I think, for Lou Klein, but I'm happy to share this one small experience I had with the great Carter Merbreyer. Thanks, folks.
You brought up the fact that Pat was failing, and I think for the last 10 years or so of her life, she had Alzheimer's, I think, and she was slipping. And shortly after she died, I saw Carter at lunch at Waverly Heights, and I said, that's such a terrible disease that it just takes away 95% of a person and leaves, what's left. And Carter said, oh, but 5% of Pat was better than 100% of everybody else I know. They were very much in love. They really were a team. And we could debate at some length how far he might have gone without her. Steve Sachs was a studio technician at Channel 6, and in fact, he never quits. He's going to be there Monday night doing the lighting for a debate on the Senate race at Channel 6. They dig him out of retirement every 6 months or so. Come on up here and tell us a couple of Captain Noah stories. Not too many now. No.
Thank you, Mark. It really was great, but before I start, I just want to say how great it is to see Bob Kravitz back, and I hope Lou has a speedy recovery, because most of the stuff good that ever happened to me is thanks to Lou for being my teacher, my boss, and actually he probably knew me before I was born, because he did know the family. But anyway, getting back to Captain Noah, working on his show was really a great experience. I had worked with, I don't know how many of you remember Anita Cleaver, The World Around Us, Princess Cindy Lou and Hal Woodard. I won't go into what their nicknames were. And several other kids shows. I didn't do Pick Temple. But anyway, Captain Noah, Sally Starr, Captain Noah was different than all of them. Like Mark said, he had command of the studio. The show, he was always trying stuff with technical chroma key. My favorite part of the show was the world. He did a thing about "This land is your land," and he did it in chroma key. And he would take someone like Paul Bunyan and tell the story, but tell it. He was talking to children, but he didn't talk to them like they were children. He talked to them like it was a history class, and that was different than other children, especially aimed at that level. He had an uncanny knack of how to do things, and with chroma key, we did a great bit, a circus act where we took a box, a chroma key. How many of you all, I assume you all know what chroma key is. In film, it would be matting, I guess. We had a box that he would stand on, and the picture was a tightrope, and he'd walk like he's at the circus. Like Larry would play circus music, and he'd walk along the thing like he's doing a circus act. And we did all these imaginative things, send your pictures, for kids to take a magical trip. Working on the show was fun because he always had animals, he had good food, Tasty Cake would come in. We'd grab it first, and then he'd take it down to the cafeteria on the second floor. And the Sebus would come in, then Jay Johnstone, Charles Barkley, Peggy Fleming. All these people would come in, and they all seemed to have fun on the show. They were all relaxed. Carter would talk to them. But what was different, again, was he didn't talk to them like for children. He talked for like adults, and the kids loved it. And he always knew those things. The one quick story I will tell you that I always got a kick out of, when they built his set, the first part of, when he first came to the station, I probably did his first show. He came in, but I think he was sponsored by the National Council of Churches or the Lutheran Church. I'm not sure how the mechanics worked in that. But he came in, I think it was Lou Klein, Irene was his secretary then, She was, I think, his church secretary, and Gary, who was a detective. I don't know why I remember all that. And they helped him. They put up a little bow in front of in the studio, and he was doing little things then for children. And as the show kept getting bigger and bigger, and then I don't know how the mechanics work, but then he became part of Channel 6, and I think he left being a minister. And they built a set, and when they built the set, they built it in the scene shop. Well, they built it so big, they had to cut the set in half to get it out the door. I remember that. And then there was the steps. If you remember the show live, he came down a sliding board. Elaine could tell you some of the stories there. She was a lot of the glue that held the show together, too. The sliding board, he had to stop doing that because he landed on that concrete floor. When he landed on the concrete floor, it took a toll on his heel, and he had to stop doing it. But the steps, the opening of the show was he'd blow the horn, and then he'd run down the steps. Then he'd run up the steps again and do the announcement. Well, one step was about a 1/16 of an inch higher than all the other steps. And he never remembered it. He'd come running around and go through the thing and come running up the steps, and he always kicked that step, and then you hear a four-letter word. Fortunately, the microphones weren't on. But he must have done that for a year and a half. He never remembered that step, or if he did remember it, when he went past it, he'd kick it real hard. And Barry the barometer, when the wire broke, he had a little foot pedal, and Barry the barometer would give you the weather, and every once in a while it was a little fishing line that went down on a piece of wood, and he'd tap it, and that wire would break. So now we were on a tight shot of Barry the barometer, and the mouth wouldn't move. So then they had to go to all sorts of crazy things. He'd make jokes about it, and then Pat would come around and start tickling him and pulling his pant leg and things like that. It really was a fun show. You never knew what was going to happen. Ed Linderman, who used to do the flower show one time, they had a scooter, and he rode on Ed Linderman decided to come on the set with the scooter, a motor scooter, and he missed the brakes. He forgot to hit the brakes and went flying in the wall. This was all live on TV. And some of the animals did a lot of things, too, in that show that I can't talk about. Anyway, it was a wonderful show. It's great to see the people here from Channel 6, Mark and Linda and Elaine, who, one thing I will say, most people don't remember, Captain Noah got sick. I think he got diverticulitis and was out for about 2 months. And it was Elaine and Pat that did the show for those 2 months. I'll have to ask Elaine how the ratings were when they did. I'm sure it went up a little bit. But anyway, it was great working on the show, and thank you very much.
Steve mentioned that it's good to see Bob Kravitz back here again. Bob rented a room at Hahnemann Hospital for a month or so, but he's back, doing well. They charge a lot, don't they? Yeah, but it works. And Bob's the chief photographer for the group, and he's on the board, and he's also going to be in the Hall of Fame next. Yes. And for what it's worth, he's the first news photographer ever to go into the Pioneers Hall of Fame, and that's quite an honor and well deserved. He and I shot several hundred stories together over the years. Bob Kravitz.
Carter Merbreyer. Most of the time I saw him was doing some films when he first started for him, projects that Lou Klein would set us up together. The funniest one, and I think it's even before you came on, Elaine, the funniest one was the Philadelphia pretzel factory. They had just opened up, and he went in to see how they made pretzels. It took him an hour and a half to twist one pretzel. Then he found out I played violin. I played violin since I'm 4 years old. Now, really can't do it much because arthritis. He had me on the show to play the violin, and I did some my own compositions. and he had me play one of my own, and we got some nice calls from there. But my favorite and my fondest memory is I came back from the Gulf War, and he asked if I would come on, and I told him I had the actual uniform I had to put on, the Army uniform, the camouflage uniform, with the gas masks. And I showed him that inside was the charcoal filter you had to wear inside this. So he said, come on and show the kids. Were you there then? Martin Sheen was a guest on Anita Cleaver. Okay? So we walk in. Susan came with me, my wife. Came in, and there's Martin Sheen. We talked nicely, got everything together, walked into an area, the bathroom of Channel 6 on the other side, and I put on the camouflage suit with the hat, and I had the gas mask, and Martin Sheen gave a look as if to chop my head off. And he turns around. Now, you got to picture this. It's that big, long room we used to call the green room, okay? And Martin Sheen was like up front. I was walking in from the bathroom, and Carter was standing in the back. So Martin starts yelling at me, how dare you go on television with that uniform? And he started yelling and screaming, no one should know about war. And Carter's back there like this. And this was his sense of humor. And he's back there, and as Martin Sheen, and my wife now is like turning red and just shrinking down onto the floor. Martin's yelling at me not to go on and don't tell kids what war was like. And Carter yells, all right, Kravitz, do the punchline. I had no punchline. I'm just standing there. And Carter goes, come on, tell it like it is. Tell him how you love war. And this is Carter's to push you on and on and on. He tried to egg you on. But the one thing I remember, not just of Carter, was Pat. Pat and I sort of turned out every once in a while I'd go down and I'd talk with Pat, just confidentially or just talk, or we'd have just a nice talk. But when I had the helicopter crash, and then when I had the cancer, I got a call from Pat Carter, and telling me that Carter himself was, Pat Murbauer, not Pat Carter, telling me that Carter sends his regards. But that was one thing I knew. If they liked or knew somebody, they did think about you, even if you haven't seen them for a long time. And everyone loved Captain Noah. And I myself loved Captain Noah when they first started. And the last thing I'll tell you, I was brought in to Channel 6 to start my job. Second day there, Lou Klein comes walking upstairs, and he's looking all around the newsroom. And I'm in there early because I wanted to give a good impression. You. This is before Carter even came in. You. I said, what? Will be Sally Starr's warm-up for her audience they used to bring in every once in a while of kids. So whenever she had an audience, I was there. Now, here comes Carter Murbauer and Captain Noah. Not once did Sally talk about Carter. Not once. And my job with her went down, but my filming job went up with him in the mornings. And then the ones who took it over was Ken Bajmanian and Ben Leake. They were his main film people at the time, if you all remember him from Channel 6. And they are both passed by now. But anytime you think of Carter and Pat, it's Captain Noah and Mrs. Noah. And thank you for having me here.
Captain Noah really had two jobs at Channel 6. He was a TV star and generated ratings and made money for the station, but he also was a community representative. He would go out and speak to people in various groups, and as such, Linda Munich, who was for 35 years or so the community affairs director, 32 years, yeah, come tell us about Carter, things that you can repeat. I haven't said Donald Trump all day, but they had a strange, maybe?
Well, not so strange, but I had a lot of fun with Carter and Pat. And not to do with his show, but as talent at Channel 6, you were in the Thanksgiving Day Parade, and Carter and I did do some community outreach. And his method of outreach was very interesting at times. I'll tell you, I met Carter in 1961 when I was a student at Temple. Art was saying he was a graduate student, I was an undergraduate student in 1961, and I was the first chair in the brass ensemble. I graduated Temple with a degree in music performance, believe it or not, and I'm a trumpet player. So we went to Carter's church to perform in some kind of, I can't remember what special, maybe it was Christmas or something like that. So we finished performing, and Carter came up to me and patted me on the head. He said, "You play a lot of horn, little girl." And I will never forget that. Then when I got to Channel 6, I was on air, and as Mark will remember, we rode floats in the Thanksgiving Day Parade. But before you got on the float, it was very early in the morning, Larry Ferrari and Carter and Pat would make wonderful refreshments, let's call them. And it was coffee with very strong whiskey or something in it, and would invite everyone before you got on the float to indulge. You'll stay warmer. And he never stopped joking. What really got me is when children would come up to the float, Captain Noah, Captain Noah. He said, "Want a picture?" And he would hand out pictures, but he would say, "Go tell your dad you need $1." I swear. And it was all I could do not to fall down laughing. He had these little children, they looked confused. And he said, "Oh," and then he would say, "Okay, maybe just 50 cents. But he would prompt all the children to go collect money before they got a picture. But beyond all of that, I have to say that Carter and Pat were two of the kindest people I have ever met, always encouraging. And what is most prominent in my mind is when I didn't have the job yet. I had to do an audition to get the job at Channel 6. And my subject to be interviewed for this studio show was Carter Murbrian. And believe me, it's challenging to interview Carter and keep a straight face. So I will always appreciate him. I count him as a mentor to me and to every intern that ever was at the station. And he's someone I will always remember.
He did like pretty girls. He liked pretty girls, yes. Our last guest is Elaine Scapalla, who was an associate producer on the program and has some fond memories from those days gone by. Elaine?
You have to bear with me because I was on the show for 9 years. I was on the show and I was the producer of the show. And Captain Noah was all about props. So I have props. One time he sent a woman who came in from the Apple Council with 3 apples, and he said, "Christ, don't you understand? We have an audience the size of Veterans Stadium, filled 10 times. Now go buy some apples." So it was a live show, and she actually went down to I think it was an Acme at that time. She came back with her car filled with apples. So I always remember to bring the props. And this was one of his latest, when he came out with his latest book about walking with the tiger. He came up with some of these, so most of the people that knew him got one of these. If Captain Noah came up here right now, he would take an old newspaper and he would roll it up into a ball, and he would make a few tears, use some Scotch tape, and he'd make a giant tree or maybe a pirate's hat. And if Carter Murbriar came up here, he would say some appropriate phrase from Shakespeare. He loved Shakespeare. He quoted Shakespeare all the time. And he told me one time that when he was back in grade school, from the first time he heard Shakespeare, he loved it. And his teacher, whenever she mentioned the name, he would just jump out of his seat and stand there. And it got to be the standing joke that all the kids would say in unison, "Sit down, Carter, we know you love Shakespeare." So the two of them, though, Captain Noah and Carter Murbrier, did become one. For any of you that have seen his tombstone, across the top it has Captain Noah and his magical ark. It has an ark in the middle. Across the bottom it has Sing a Rainbow, and it has his name and Pat's name, and underneath them Captain Noah and Mrs. Noah. For 45 years, I'm lucky to say I was one of his friends. And that's a great accomplishment because this man had a great ego, and friends came and went. I started with the show right out of college, and I was with him for 9 years. And I think one of the reasons they gave me so much slack is that Pam, their daughter, married an Englishman and went to England, and she was exactly my age. So I think they figured, okay, give her a little slack. She's like Pam's age. I said he had a great ego, but I think that ego is one of the reasons why he was such a success. Our audience was not just kids growing up in Gladwin that would like sugary things like Gene London had. He was powerful, and he came across as a strong male figure to some of the kids that watched in the ghetto, kids that wanted a grandfather and a male figure in their life that was strong and egotistical. It didn't start, his ego did not start with the show. Few people talked about him as being a Lutheran minister. And actually, when Carter started out, in the last few years of his life, we worked on several books together, and he came up with this biography that we sent out to publishers and agents. And when Carter started out in the ministry, he actually was the first, he became a police chaplain, and he was the first clergy who ever said that during times of stress, the policeman over the police radio should always hear a prayer. And he was involved in the Girard Street riots back in 1964, where the black community and the police were actually battling, and that's where that started out. He did syndicated radio shows back in the day as a minister. There was one on WPN that was national, and I remember my mother used to listen to it all the time, and he would talk about, give me that old-time religion. He started the sunrise service on Broad Street, and it was major because he brought in Captain Noah's style, brought in all kinds of animals that defecated all over Broad Street, and the people weren't real happy with that. But he was one of the few clergy when the National Council of Churches decided that they should do a Sunday school-like public service show. He was one of the few people that came forward and said, this is what I want to do. And he was very proud of being a Lutheran minister, but when his Captain Noah show became so well known and became a daily show, the Lutheran Church decided that that was not their idea of continuing a ministry. And although he continued to be a licensed minister, he was no longer able to practice as an ordained minister would. And that hurt him until the day he died. Back in the 1970s, the Lutheran Church decided to make the first woman a minister. And Carter asked me to please book her on the Captain Noah show as an inspiration to other young girls out there that they could become a minister. And she did. When Carter, just a year ago, published his latest book, I don't know how many of you got this one, Carter wanted to send it to this Lutheran minister, this woman minister, who had now become a bishop, because he kind of wanted to say, like, told you so, this is what I accomplished. And after Carter died, she called his daughter Pam, the bishop now, and said, I would like to speak at his funeral. So afterwards, after the funeral was over, I went up to her and I said, you know, that hurt him all those years. I just wanted to let you know. She said, you know, that's why I'm here. I wanted to try and show that we want to undo this. I want to mend fences. So you can imagine how surprised Carter's daughter Pam and I were when she walked up to Pam with a $300 bill for speaking at a funeral. And all I could think of is Carter, whose signature laugh was always, was up there looking down and going, so he was a great talent. And I told you, he had a great ego, which sometimes worked in his favor. He taught himself, he had all these talented musicians around him, he taught himself how to play 4 chords on his guitar. And one of the songs that he could play with those 4 chords was, "This land is your land, this land is my land." So, of course, like I think Steve was talking about this map, at least once a week we had a segment where he had the map behind him and he would weave the stories, the folklore and the real true history stories, and he would sing that song. Well, then he got the great idea to write the song "Send Your Pictures." Again, just the 4 chords. So Larry Ferrari, who everybody has mentioned, was wonderful. Larry Ferrari played background music for every show that was out there. Al Albert's talent show, Chief Halftown. He couldn't read music, but you could sing or hum or play something and he could just play it right back. So he was a great musical talent. And Mrs. Noah was a graduate of Oberlin School of Music. She actually sang with big bands before Carter met her. So you won't, or maybe you will be surprised that I have something here that is a collector's item I think most people don't have anymore. And it is the 45 record that Carter made with not Larry Ferrari or me, because I was also on the show, or Pat, I think is in one song. But he thought this was a wonderful record that he would be able to sell on the show. So I'm just going to play you because you heard how good it could sound. I think you will enjoy hearing Captain Noah's version all by himself. I'm not sure whether Pat's in this one. I don't think she is. It's coming. Don't give up.
Isn't it wonderful how God took all the colors
That's
to
Captain
make
Noah.
the most beautiful thing in the world, a rainbow like people. Red and yellow and pink and green, purple and orange and blue.
And he thought he was good. I think we sold maybe 5 of these. It's got "This Land Is Your Land," "High Hopes," "Send Your Pictures," and the Rainbow Song. And Larry Ferrari, the first time he brought it back, all excited, he brought it back to the studio. And Larry Ferrari looked at him and he shook his head and he just said, "Oh, Noah, Noah, Noah." And that was the last record that Carter made. In his later life, we talked about Pat and her Alzheimer's. His health really deteriorated because she would, like so many Alzheimer people, run off in the middle of the night, and he would chase after her, and he fell. So his health deteriorated, and he ended up at Shenandoah, which is a beautiful, beautiful community. And the people there appreciated him. It was a perfect place for him, because most of those people had children that grew up watching the show. I would see him in the last 5 years after Pat died. I saw him or visited with him once a week, and I would pick up his mail when I was there. And I kept wondering why he kept getting all this junk mail. He was always very big at promoting. So I thought maybe they knew he was living there, and he got all this junk mail, things that you could buy and have made into coffee mugs or whatever. So you think, who buys all that junk? Well, let me tell you who buys all that junk. A man named Captain Noah, who wants his name to be out there. Now, these were just a few items that I picked up that I had in my own home. People at Shenandoah had much more. We had a calculator with his name on it from your good friend Captain Noah. Everybody at Shenandoah got that. When he came out with his new book with the tiger on it, we have a tiger that everybody got. I have my wonderful Captain Noah pen, which flashes several colors as well as writes, again with Captain Noah's name on it. I have my markers to stick in any kind of book that you have. I have a flashlight so I can open my door and see where the key goes. And I have this is really a nice one here from your good friend Captain Noah. And they all say, you know, Captain Noah, WABC on it. This one has a measuring tape measure on the bottom. This one's very useful, actually, and it's got something where you open up bottles, and it's also a keychain. So this is just a small assortment, and I miss him dearly, but I think there are some companies in China going out of business that miss him even more than I do. I told you he was smart and witty, and even in the end, in these last 5 years, I was able to get him an agent to publish 2 more books, and it's very hard to get an agent today. He was able to reprint 2 of his books. They set up a display at Elmwood Park Zoo with all of his memorabilia, and they sold his Prayers of the Animals. We never sold his record again. He wrote articles that appeared in editorials, the Pennsylvania Gazette, which is University of Pennsylvania's articles. He was so smart. There wasn't a day that I talked to him that I didn't feel that I learned something. Again, his health went downhill. And even though he loved talking to people at Shenandoah, he said he always said he was a loner. And people liked to see him so they could hear Captain Noah's stories. But in the end, he didn't take any meals outside of his room because he kept saying that he didn't want the people to say, "Did you see Captain Noah? Look at how terrible he looks now." Well, that didn't stop some of the people from Shenandoah. And he used to tell me about one woman that all the time, every other day, she'd knock on his door and she'd say, "Captain Noah, my cousin is here and I would like her to come and meet you." And he would just slam the door in her face. He was very good at doing things like that. And he would just say, I'm busy. And that didn't stop her. She came back every other day. So he said, finally I said, every time she knocked on my door, I would just yell out, "Go away, I'm on the toilet." And it didn't stop her. She continued to come back day after day, and he would just yell out. I said, "Why don't you say you're on a phone call?" He said, No, I want to embarrass her. It didn't embarrass her, and she kept coming back until I think the day he died, she would knock on his door. And I think the people at Shenandoah, I see them now, I picture them eating lunch or having a dinner and talking about how much fun they had when Captain Noah was among them. And I can just hear one little old lady sitting back in the corner and piping up and say, "I really miss him, but that was no life. He spent all this time just sitting on the toilet." And Carter's looking down going, "I miss you, Carter." I got to collect my props.
We have a couple of minutes left. If anybody has a story they want to add, we have a microphone here. Feel free to step up, introduce yourself, and oh, you're just collecting your mic. Yeah. Anybody here have anything? Yes, come up.
Jerry asked me to say something on this.
Oh, sure. There's a mic.
Thank you. Hi, Mike. For those who don't know me, I'm Johnny B. Hall, and I drive from Hershey to come here for the various things that we have here. Everybody likes chocolate. That's nice. I'm glad to know that. Probably right around here. I gave Buffalo Bob Smith a ride in my car. I met Fred Rogers in a gymnasium in Chicago. Right there is where I met Carter Mearbeyer. right here, actually there, I met Carter Meerbreyer. It was a march, and I remember that because it was the scholarship luncheon. And Jenny and I were just getting involved in that. And our grandson was with us. He was there, now he's up here, 14. And Diego asked me if I wanted to say a couple words. Well, if anybody knows me, they know that I never use one word when 10 will do, okay? So I held forth a little bit on the value of education. And as I came down, Carter reached out his hand and shook hands with me on the way down. And I was so thrilled. And I came back to him later, I said, Carter, I really appreciate that. He said, well, I really like what you're saying. Okay, good, thank you. 30 seconds. But I remember that so well because it was just such a thing. Captain Noah said, yeah, okay, love that. That's my story. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other stories before we wrap up? I do have one final one I can add. I was talking to Wally Kennedy the other day, and he mentioned that in 1988, in December, Carter came into the office, face was white. An airplane had crashed at Lockerbie, Scotland, and his daughter was coming home that same day from London, and he didn't know what plane she was on, and he was white as a ghost. And the word is that Steve Sachs at the time had a cousin. Somebody worked for the airlines.
I had a cousin that was in customs, and
Ah,
Carter was Carter, he kid me all the time. I know a lot of people in the business. I don't know that any more than anybody else. By the way, I went to Carter. I said, Carter, do you mind if I try to find out what happened? He said, news, nobody could get any answers. So I have a cousin, I don't see him that often, but I talked to him. He was with customs. And it just so happens he was at Kennedy Airport. And I got hold of him. I told him about Carter's story. And he says, I'll get back to you in a half hour. Well, he calls me back in about 20 minutes. He said, I don't know where they are, but they landed, they are in the United States.
oh,
So Carter said, how did you find out? He was shocked about it. Trust me, they aren't safe. And then I asked my cousin, I said, Joey, how did you track that down? He said, well, when you come into the United States, you sign that customs out, white little piece of paper in the plane about what you bought overseas. He said, they put it in a cigar box and everything else, and then when they're done with shit, they take it wherever they take it. Because I went down and checked that piece of paper, and I saw that they signed the customs sheet, so I knew they were in the United States, and that's it.
and you certainly made his day. Yeah, Wally said he was walking around sick. Oh, yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. Yes. Sure, by all means. Here's a microphone.
Am I good? Should I talk right here? Yeah, I'm Robin Edelman, my husband Ira Edelman, we're members, proud members of Broadcast Pioneers. And my dad, Leon Love, he loved being part of this group. He was a member, and he passed away back in July. And on the Channel 6 website, along with Dave Roberts, wherever he is now, I know no one can see this, and I'll be glad to send it, but this picture has Captain and Mrs. Noah and Dave Roberts in the middle, and oddly enough, a picture of the three of us in the back with my dad. He's directly in back of Carter, and they passed away just a couple months apart. And I felt that somehow there was a link there. But at this luncheon, my daughter, who was much younger at the time, Marlene Edelman, and she has done poems for that Jerry had asked her to do for Herb Clark and whatnot. She became a lifelong fan of, even though it wasn't in her day, a lifelong fan of Carter and Mrs. Noah, Captain and Mrs. Noah, because she sang the Rainbow Song. And she sang it so well, he asked her to sing it twice. And they both hugged her and said, "We would love to have you on the show if we still had the show." So I figured I would mention this link with my dad, my late dad, who we miss, I know everyone misses, as well as my daughter, who loves coming to the luncheons and the dinner when she can. And I just wanted to mention those two things. Thank you so much.
Thank you. One last item, Carter's dearest friend late in life was a doctor named Paul Moak, who was his doctor and good friend. And they used to come to Waverly Heights once in a while to have lunch, and I saw them there a couple of times visiting my in-laws. And Paul and Carter were best of friends late in life, and Paul died a week before Carter. So things come and things go. Thank you all for coming.